Hey everyone, thanks for joining the stream today. Today we're going to be talking about building instant serverless GraphQL backends and APIs using Grafbase. And I'm really excited to be joined today by the founder and CEO, Fredrik. We're going to look at a demo of the platform, how we can build our first serverless GraphQL API, and also do a little Q&A on how the magic works behind the scenes. So please welcome me in bringing him onto the stage. Hey,
Hi, Lee.
How are you?
Good.
Thanks for joining me today. Yeah, I'm really excited to see the demo and to talk more about the really amazing work that you've been doing. And maybe just to kick things off for people tuning in, could you tell me a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are today with Grafbase?
Yeah, absolutely. Born and raised in Sweden, but spent a good amount of time abroad. So I lived in San Francisco for about 10 years. In the past 8 years or so, I was working at a company called The Real Real, which is a luxury marketplace for high-end goods. So I was a CTO there for a while through the IPO, and I left a bit more than a year ago to start Grafbase.
That's awesome. And so when you were at The Real Real, were you working with GraphQL, or was that the architecture that y'all used as well too?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of started, when I joined in 2013, it was a Rails monolith, that was the thing back then. And we scaled it to microservices because that was the thing you did. I spent a great amount of time designing our REST API around 2013, 2014, and we kind of created a gateway that fanned out to microservices, and we optimized it for mobile and websites, and then we kind of I landed on GraphQL in 2015, and I was like, they're doing exactly what we're doing, but much better, and it's the standard, so let's do it. So we kind of started that work 2016, and we eventually launched that in 2017. We also kind of embarked upon serverless at the time, but it was still fairly new. We kind of did some Lambda, we played around with Dynamo, but amazing technologies, but the kind of developer experience and just like the tooling was not there, and it's quite frankly not there still. And then with the Jamstack kind of evolution happened around the same time, and we eventually launched, re-platformed the front-end website to Next and moved to Vercel as well around 2019. So yeah, that definitely influenced how I thought about the world, and that was kind of an inspiration for Grafbase.
Maybe for those tuning in who are more on the front end side, have not worked with GraphQL much, maybe they've only worked with REST, could you give just the quick pitch for why GraphQL and maybe the problem that it solves?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, without going into REST versus GraphQL, because that's a discussion you could have forever. But for us and for a lot of people, I think what speaks to GraphQL, especially in a front-end context, or mobile and Jamstack, or even front-end in general, is the fact that it's a standard. I mean, JSON API, there are JSON standards, but you kind of usually you have to violate them to do certain things. Like, for example, if you want to cherry pick which fields you want to show, so you can kind of shape the data, and you can also, it's optimized for single request, multiple operations, right? So especially on mobile devices, but also to a big extent on front-end websites, you want to have as few round trips as possible to your backend to render your content as soon as possible, and GraphQL is great at that, right? It's you kind of push that logic to the server, and you get a much faster response time. It's also typed, and it has documentation built in, so it's a lot of nice things packaged together, and it makes a lot of sense for some things, but not for everything.
Yeah, I think my experience working with GraphQL and why I'm really excited to see your demo is that there have been certain things that have been phenomenal And there's certain things that have been pain points. And a lot of the pain points have been around the developer experience of actually stitching together the tooling needed to use it. So to your point about it being typed, then you can enter in this world where you have like, a code generation library to build out your API based on your GraphQL schema. And I think because of the friction in the DX there has been some people, I think, who have tried to come up with new solutions and iterate and improve on that. So I'm very excited to hear a little bit more about what you've been up to. Could you talk to me more about how it led to you saying, you know what, we're going to build Grafbase and we're going to take on this problem and we're going to make, instant GraphQL serverless APIs like accessible for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was obviously, like, if you go way back, I tried AWS the first week it was announced, so 2005 or 6, I don't remember exactly, but I was kind of blown away by, like, finally this, like, mind shift. But I was always frustrated with how time consuming and complicated it was to spin up infrastructure, and quite frankly it still is this many years later. But I always kind of tried, Engine Yard, Riot Scale, and then when Heroku came out, 15 years ago, it really kind of blew my mind. And like that just always, this Git-based workflow, kind of built for Rails at the time, but just like proc files and just like much more usable, and the developer experience of shipping a website was amazing, right? And it's still really good, even though innovation really stopped, I would say, 2010 when they got acquired to some extent. And then, time passed, that kind of stuck, and now we saw, with the emergence of Jamstack in 2016, 2017, Zeit, and now Vercel rebranded, and Netlify, and a bunch of other companies that are kind of building the next generation of tooling. So the front end community is really like having an amazing time right now. There's so many good products and platforms out there that make your life easy and that focus on performance, getting CI/CD, getting preview environments, and a Git integration. That's kind of, you just expect that now. You don't do it yourself, or at least I wouldn't. But then it's like, okay, your API. It's okay, here we go. Where do I deploy it? Do I do GraphQL or REST or gRPC? What database do you use? And like, message queue, full text search. It's a lot to just decide on the stack and then to deploy it in a way that's manageable and scalable and cost effective, and then setting up CI/CD. So it's like way too much. But these are all things that I've done over and over for the past 20 years plus. So then I felt, why don't I build something like that for the backend, where you do things like, Git-based workflows, give you serverless preview environments, and all just focus on like a really beautiful local developer experience, for example, with no dependencies on Java or Docker or anything like that. It's just a native binary for your OS with an NPM wrapper. Like, that's what it should be like, but there is no such thing out there yet. And so that was my inspiration of doing Grafbase.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I've definitely felt that building my own APIs and backends and trying to stitch together disparate AWS services into something, or looping in some AWS services and some managed services, trying to like piece all those pieces together. It can be difficult sometimes. So I am excited to see what y'all are cooking up. If you're ready, I would love to jump into the demo and just kind of see more behind the scenes of the cool stuff y'all are building.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Sounds good. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. I'll pull up your screen share and we can kind of just kick things off here. So let me turn that on now. We can see your screen. Perfect. Let's kick things off.
Okay, so here's the Grafbase GitHub organization, where we have the Grafbase repo, and in the Grafbase repo, there are a few things that we've open sourced so far. So the CLI is one, where it's a Rust native CLI where you can run Graph-based locally. It's also available through an NPM wrapper. I'll showcase that in a bit. Then we also have examples and templates. The templates is just kind of showcasing some simple schemas that you can deploy to Graph-based. So, for example, here we have a blog schema where it's really just GraphQL SDL that, for those of you familiar with GraphQL, you should grok it right away. But it's also quite similar to other things that people have attempted in the past. So here, go ahead.
Do you want to command plus that up a couple instances?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We can zoom in. Yeah, I think it is interesting to start with the GraphQL schema, especially for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with it. But you're basically declaratively defining the schema for your data layer, right? These are the models that you have. This is how it's going to map back to some database.
Exactly. So we kind of debated this. There's like kind of two camps: is code first, is SDL first, or schema first. Like I feel like this kind of you lost the magic of GraphQL when you go to code first. We might offer it in the future. I'm not saying we won't, but this is really, really kind of nice. You can mentally just like kind of look at it at a glance. These are all your models, right? So here we have a user. That's a user model, and it has an ID, an email, name, and posts. And posts is in a relation. So here you can see it's a list of posts, and post is defined here, and the post and the references the user back, so that you can kind of navigate that if you need to, and also a post is comment. So in here I've also defined a unique directive, which says the email has to be unique. All with basic, like this is, if I deploy this, I get a GraphQL API with persistence built in and validation logic for email and associations kind of built in. So really, it's a really nice time saver.
It's an interesting point you mentioned, being schema first, right? Because if you back out of this folder, like this whole example is just the schema, right? Like this is the whole thing. That's all. Like that's what you deploy.
Yeah, right now, right? So fast forward a few months, I think there's going to be more folders and files in here. We're going to add the ability to create custom GraphQL resolvers, right? So I think you imagine a resolvers folder, and then we're going to support. For those of you who don't know what a GraphQL resolver is, it's basically, this is the default behavior of a field, right? So email we will then generate resolver for every field to talk to the database. But if you ever wanted to say, hey, talk to Stripe or Elasticsearch or Algolia or something like that, or an existing REST API somewhere else, then you can create a resolver for the name, for example, and then we would have the ability for you to create that in here on the file system, and then using conventions hook it up like that.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so then going back to the examples folder. So here, what we've done so far is we've created examples for popular frameworks. So we're working on Remix, Astro, and everything else as we speak, but these are the first three. So what they are is to-do list examples with frameworks, in this case Next.js. And as you can see, it's a monorepo, so you have the Graph-based folder here, along with everything else that you used to see. And similar to the templates, it's the Graph-based folder with a schema that has a to-do list with to-dos, and the to-do is defined here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone this repo, and then I'm going to copy the Next.js example into a new repo and push it up to my kind of Next.js to-do repo in my private account.
Got it.
Sound good? Okay. All right. So here is my terminal. So what I've done is, this is the Graph-based repo that I pulled. So I'm going to copy the Next.js example to a new folder.
Okay.
Let's do it here. And then node modules are being copied. So we have to wait a little bit.
The thousands of files in node modules. Yes. How are you liking Warp as an editor? Or as a
I think it's
terminal?
great. I like it a lot. I've been using it for a while. I like iterating really fast. So there's a bunch of stuff coming out all the time, and it just has a lot of nice features that I use, and just the look of it is nice. It's also written in Rust.
Nice.
So the performance is quite nice. All right, so here is the Next.js to-do example that we saw, right? This is now on my local. So let's open up Visual Studio here. And then here is the schema that we saw, right? So here's our to-do list and our to-do. So it's a TypeScript Tailwind setup. And I guess what we can do first is just, init repo. And then let's start it. Vercel dev, so VC, for those of you who already know, most likely it's an alias for the Vercel CLI. So here we're going to set up Next.js to-do project in my personal account, and I'm not going to use an existing one. I'm going to create a new one, and it's located in the root. So now this will create the project on the Vercel platform, and these are the default settings. They'll work. Now I should have the website running. Well, actually, it's not. Let's use Chrome, and here is the kind of localhost running, and then you can see here network error. That means it's trying to talk to the Graphql API. So that's our environment variable that is defaulted to localhost 4000 GraphQL. There's an example that we provided here, and in the README we kind of talk a little bit about what you have to do to get up and running, but it's pretty straightforward. So Graph-based API URL, localhost doesn't require auth, so it works without an API key. Okay, so if we're happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the Graph-based CLI. So the local dev command, so GB stands for Graph-based. It's the same as doing Graph-based, but GB is shorter. So GB dev will start my local server, as well as spin up a Graphql Playground. So the Playground is hosted here, port 4000, and the endpoint is here, which is the one you saw in the environment variable. So I'm going to go ahead and open Playground. So here, we kind of have a GraphQL API running locally with a database in the background. And now, if you go back here, then the error message is gone.
Could you talk more about the database in the background? So how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So here, so locally, what we do is we have, actually, let's start with what we do in production. So production, we're running DynamoDB. The reason we chose that database is it's serverless, it speaks HTTP, and it has really strong P99 guarantees in performance. So at any scale, you can get guarantees on that. So that to us was really important, because we want to provide fast, low latency by default and at any scale. And it also scales to 0, so it's very cost effective, which means you can have preview environments, and essentially unlimited preview environments for free until you add data to them. That's something that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel here. What we provide is the developer experience on top of amazing cloud services like DynamoDB and Cloudflare Workers. But locally, we kind of started out thinking, okay, let's run DynamoDB local, which is provided by Amazon, but it's available through a jar file. which means you need to install Java or Docker. But we didn't feel like that should be required, and especially if you're a Jamstack developer, you probably don't have Java and you probably don't have Docker, or if you do, you shouldn't require it to run Graph-based. So we decided to write our own kind of DynamoDB emulator or a bridge in Rust, and that essentially translates DynamoDB calls to SQLite. So that's how we achieve kind of production functionality, localhost with low kind of dependencies.
Yeah, installing Java would not be great, so I like that suggestion.
Yeah.
Nice. You want to command plus that one too? The
Yes.
GraphQL, Explorer. There we go.
So here's our to-do list. Pretty simple. So you can create some groceries, perhaps. Oh, it's like it didn't. That's weird. For 2000. Oh, I need to restart. That's why. I forgot to change the
front end before the back end. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's just see that. Okay, cool. Wait a second. Okay. All right. So there's groceries, and then let's create like milk. I don't know, eggs, bread, something like that. That's pretty standard, right? So now what's happened, like in the background, we've persisted those, well, the list itself and 3 to-dos inside our backend. So if you want to just look at it in more detail, you could do use the Graphql Playground, and this is where Graphql really shines, right? So now it's typed, right? So you look in your schema here, you have the to-do list. So what we do is we generate, the Graphql queries and mutations for each type. So in this case, if you want to look at the to-do list collection, you do to-dos collection, and then we kind of have some pagination here. So let's get the first 10. Actually, it's supposed to be the to-do list, yeah. And then here we have something called edges, nodes. So this is what we use to kind of traverse and paginate your collections. This is a little awkward at first, but okay, title. Right, so let's do that. So here you can kind of see the to-do example represented in GraphQL, essentially. So groceries, milk, eggs, bread. So here, this is the same representation, but JSON, essentially. So groceries are here, along with these three nodes, which is all kind of hooked up by us for you, right? So you don't have to worry about persistence or resolvers or even the GraphQL API itself. It's all done for you.
So in the to-do example that you shipped, is there already a kind of a query where you're pulling this and you're using a GraphQL query like this and you're fetching this data already?
Yeah, exactly. So next, what we can show, that's a good question. So here, what we're using CodeGen, which so there's a library called GraphQL CodeGen, and it has plugins for TypeScript and stuff that we use. So what you do is you kind of point it at the GraphQL API, and then you can run a GraphQL command, which is a script here, which will then read the types and then generate the types in TypeScript so that you can use them in your app. So diving a little deeper, so here's the kind of index page, and then we have a few components. So here's the to-do list, right? And then we kind of use the mutations and the to-do lists themselves from from the generated schema, which is placed inside, here. So here you can see this is all generated, right? We didn't do this.
Got it.
So it's all kind of done for you. And then here, the to-do list collection is in here somewhere that you can use inside your components and your pages directly without you having to do it.
How do you feel about, is there a future where the Grafbase npm library that you would install would actually do the code generation for you and like put it in the node modules folder? Or is it better to like leave that code generation up to the consumer?
I mean, right now I feel it's probably just because there's such a diverse, kind of ecosystem of clients or frameworks and languages that we would have to support. So like, I think on our end, the beauty of this is that GraphQL is kind of agnostic, right? So as long as you understand GraphQL, I think there should be libraries that you can use already to generate types in the language, whether it's Kotlin or Dart or TypeScript, it should just work.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
All right, so now it's like, okay, cool. Let's push this up, right? Let's see if we can get it up and running on Vercel and Grafbase, right? So here, through the CLI, created this Next.js to-do project, and then we don't support it yet. We will in the coming weeks or months. We're going to support CLI deploys, but for now, it's through Git. So what I'm going to do is to kind of commit this. Okay. And then I'm going to add the remote for my newly created repo here. And push.
Nice.
So now that's on in here, hopefully. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's go ahead and connect the repo. Okay, so that's all nicely connected now. And then I guess I'll go to environment variables. But before I do, I'll need to deploy the Next.js repo to Grafbase. So here, like, this is also really nice because what we do is we read in the schema from GitHub.
Got it.
We should. I don't know what's going on.
Live demos.
Yeah.
It's always something.
Okay, that was weird. It just got stuck. Okay, but yeah. So here, if you're using Vercel or something similar, you're familiar with this. So this is the repo that we want to import. Select the production branch. There's only one, and then the name of the project. And then here you can actually see the schema you're about to deploy, which is quite nice. You can just get a glance. It's like, okay, this is what we'll parse and generate your GraphQL API from. Let's go ahead and deploy that.
I like the confetti.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a party.
So it shows the confetti immediately. It kicks off the deployment in the background. I see deployment in progress. And then it's actually...
And now it's done. So it takes 10 seconds or less to deploy a project. And the same goes for subsequent deploys as well as branches, which is really quite cool. So you get like a fully dedicated serverless GraphQL API that's deployed to the edge, as well as a globally replicated database along with it.
So to recap and make sure I'm understanding, on your local machine, you've built a Rust emulator for DynamoDB that uses SQLite, and that's included in the Grafbase CLI.
Yeah.
So that you can, persist data locally, refresh, it's still there. It just kind of shims out the DynamoDB compat. Then you deploy it to production. you're deploying your API out to the edge using workers. And then when you're persisting data there, it's persisting it back to DynamoDB in AWS.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, we can go into it later, but yeah, every production environment has its own table. I don't want to diverge, but like we use single table design modeling. It's really powerful. Something we'll blog about probably later. It's a bigger discussion, but we want to make sure that your data is queried as optimal as possible and is stored as efficiently as possible as well. So like you can no longer have to deal with N+1 issues, index maintenance, or scaling problems, because we'll take care of it for you.
And is that partially an infrastructure decision, but also partially in editor feedback? Like, are there constraints of the schema that you can enforce to help solve that? Or is it you're just reverse engineering back from the GraphQL schema to solve some of that at the infrastructure level?
I mean, I guess, so like, GraphQL, right? You can make this really kind of crazy queries if you want, right? You can do like 3 levels of nesting, fetch multiple different collections all in one request, which is great, but like on the back end, it's pretty complex. So there's, projects like Data Loader that make sure that you can, fetch data more efficiently. But that's really pretty hard to do at scale. So that's something we're going to invest a lot in to make sure that whatever query you throw at it, it's going to be as optimal as possible. So yeah, that's how we've designed the DynamoDB table, to make sure that lookups are fast and efficient.
It's less about the code you're writing. Like you're basically saying, write your GraphQL schema or your GraphQL queries, even if they have multiple levels of nesting, as you please. And what our infrastructure and what our database schema design is going to do is help ensure that reads are still very efficient.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Things like look ahead and things like that. If you have nesting on your resolvers, that's going to be all taken care of for you.
Maybe just to like hammer home that point, so I'm fully understanding, how do other infrastructure or self-rolled infrastructure solutions do that wrong? Like, where do you get into an instance where the N+1 problem is like really bad? Is it that your schema?
It's very common, I would say. Like a lot of things like, we didn't have an index on that field. That's a big problem on a large table. Or I forgot to add data loader to this, so you get an N+1. That's very common, I would say. And at the end of that, once you've over optimized your database, you're essentially going to end up saying, okay, I'm not going to use joins, and I'm going to kind of model it anyway as a Dynamo table, but in SQL. Like that's at least my experience. Like you have a lot of these ongoing issues because of the nature of GraphQL being open-ended.
Got it. That makes sense.
Okay, so this is our production deployment, and this is our production URL with a subdomain of graphbase.app, which has the name of the project and the account in it. And if you have a branch, you'll include a branch. A non-production branch will have the branch name in it. So let's go ahead and copy that. And so this is the production environment, not preview, not development. So, right. So let's go ahead and add that.
Yep.
And then you also wanted to add the API key. So API keys, with the first iteration of Graphbase, we only support kind of private keys or admin keys, which have full access. So it's more geared towards server-side rendered applications. But we recently launched initial support for OpenID Connect. You can read more about it here if you're interested. But here we're now in the same schema. You can essentially add auth as an auth directive, which is a global configuration, and then you can kind of set at the object level and eventually at the field level, kind of read, write, delete permissions for that using OpenID Connect. And OpenID Connect is a more modern or newer standard for auth that we support. So you can kind of, here's an example of using Clerk. Clerk is a really great service for auth that's built kind of for the Jamstack. So with this little amount of code and the permissions, you can essentially get up and running with authentication and authorization. But I'm not going to go into that here because it's still very early.
Nice.
But for now, this is the auth that we support. So we have API keys for preview and for production. We kind of generate that for you. So here is the API key for production. So let's put that in here. That's for production. Boom. And now we've set up kind of our production configuration here on Vercel. And just to show you here, and in Graphics, you also have a playground that you can play with. So here we have some examples. If you're not familiar with them, to get up and running. Here, there's no data in production yet because we just provisioned it. But here's some information on how to paginate, how to create some stuff, and how to delete. So it's all deployed. So yeah, let's go ahead and create the deployment.
Yeah, from the CLI, push up another deployment.
Let's see, yeah. Or I guess, yeah, VC.
And it's going to use those environment variables that you added to connect to the deployed instance of your Graphbase GraphQL API.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Okay, building. I guess we can follow along here too.
Yep, and it shows the environment is production, so it pulls those specific environment variables. Makes sense. So what type of workflow do you envision folks using when they're building with Graphbase? Is it modeled really around the Git workflow where you can push changes, you push it to your repo and it kicks off a new preview build of your API, similar to how tools like Vercel do it for the front end?
Yeah, I'll showcase it here in a bit. As soon as we verified production is working, we'll add a change to the to-do app and push it up to a branch.
And can you, similar to how you could do the GraphQL Playground inside of Graphbase, is there also a way to look at the underlying data storage layer to like actually see or query where those items are being stored, or is that just not relevant because you fetch the data through the query?
Yeah, I mean the GraphQL interface is your database, right? So it's an important distinction. Like we're essentially building an edge native GraphQL database, if you will. So you can think of it as like there's no mapping or anything. That is your database. So that's how you access it.
Got it.
Okay, so let's see here. And here it's now live in production, so we can do a similar thing. Well, let's hear something more fun. For example, so now this is now live in production, and then we can go into our playground again, do some pagination, and there's our groceries list that we just created from Vercel.
Got it.
But worth noting, right? So this is not as fast as it could be because we're using an API function here, right? So it's basically a proxy that then uses the API key that's provided because the API key has full access, right? So it could be client directly to the GraphQL API, which will be possible when we enable OpenID Connect, so that you can connect directly from the client, and the JWT token will come from your IDP instead.
Yep, that makes total sense. Nice.
Okay, so here you can kind of check these done, but let's say you wanted to kind of add a description to each to-do. Let's go ahead and do that.
Nice.
Here everything's running. So yeah, add description field, for example, or maybe just call add description. Now we've created a new branch locally, and let's see here. So we can start with the create to do. So hide that. So now here we have a hook to kind of for the title. So let's add one for the description. And then on submit, it should set the description to nothing. Okay, and then here we have the input for the title itself. So I'm just gonna lazy copy this and add a description. And then on change, it will affect the description, and then we'll have to actually add that here. And we have the set description to that.
Nice.
Okay, so now what else do we need to do? So now, we got to check our our GraphQL document. So this is kind of our bridge between what we use in our app and the API itself. Because you might not need everything, right? So this is kind of your space to define your fragments and your queries and mutations. And queries here can be named. So this is, as you recall, the to-do list collection query. Well, here we're calling it to-do list. But here for the to-do fragment, let's add a description. And then we also need to update a few things, like to create and update mutations to include description.
Do you think there's a world where Graphabase would give you the option to auto-generate mutations based on your data model, or is that another situation where you kind of feel like GraphQL is the standard, we'll kind of let people define their mutations as they want, or is that a kind of future thing?
Well, so we actually do generate mutations for you, but here this is mostly just kind of how I'm using it in my app, right? So this is something that was generated already for you.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, but this is just me, like, okay, this is what I want to use, and this also hooks into the code generation, which I'll show in a bit. Just want to make sure I got everything. So we got the description here. Oh yeah, up here, of course. So that's the string. Oh, it's actually optional. Okay, so now let's open up the schema here for our backend. So here in the to-do, we wanted to add a description, but let's make it optional, just because not everyone. So bang in GraphQL means it's required. No bang means it's optional. Okay, so now just to showcase here, so we have library loading. So we detected that something changed. So it's now restarted the GraphQL API and is now serving successfully. If you're looking at it, you will now see the description field in your schema. And so the next step is code gen, right? Now, if you recall, in the package JSON, we had a script for GraphQL which invokes the GraphQL code gen. So then let's run that. Oh, I guess I forgot someplace. I was too fast.
Luckily, it's got a good error message there to help you.
It does. It's quite nice. So it's not defined, but it's probably here. Yeah.
65.
Yeah. Okay. Let's run it again. And done. Okay, so now
Nice.
It's updated this kind of types file, which is generated with a bunch of new stuff to accommodate, for the new description field. Okay, so here, I think everything looks good, but we also kind of have the ability to edit to-dos. If you recall, like in the UI, you can click here and edit. So we want that for the description as well. So here is that input. It's similar to what we did.
And you edited by clicking on them, or is that yeah? So that's
well, in this case it doesn't exist. But yeah, I mean, or you mean, are you talking about the UI?
In the UI, yeah, in the UI.
Absolutely, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
We'll show that in a bit.
A little debouncing magic in there. That's nice.
Yeah. Okay, so here it's calling the to-do kind of update, which then in turn will call the mutation for to-do update.
Oh, and that's the generated code, the on to-do update.
Yeah.
Got it.
So here, description is optional, right? So we gotta do that. And what else? Here it's gonna complain. So I guess we'll just give it a. What's it complaining about? Oh. Let's see. My font is so big, I can't find it. Here you go. Here. Okay, that should do it.
The stream font takes a little bit to get used to, having everything so massive on the screen.
Okay, I think that's done. So let's go back to make sure we're in the localhost example. Let's make sure. Okay, so here, like healthy stuff example. And now, like if you check here, it's as soon as you kind of leave brown eggs. So it's actually as soon as you kind of leave it, it makes the GraphQL request.
Got it.
Down here. Okay, so let's just check locally to make sure. So now we have a description field, right? And here it is. So it's all stored, persisted in the database, and nicely typed in your API with pretty little effort compared to what you usually have to do. So that all works and nice. Let's go ahead and commit that to make sure everything looks good. Sure. Okay, so we're now in the add description branch. Description to do. Okay, so let's push it up to the well, let's see, let's open in Chrome. I guess we can open it here. All right, so here's our pull requests, right? This is all the stuff we just saw. So we can create that, and Vercel is now building it in here.
Oh, I wonder if we needed to add preview environment variables, though.
Yes, exactly. So that's next. Good question. So here we have now a preview branch that's successfully was deployed in 9 seconds. So here is the kind of change set. So you can see what was added here to the schema.
Oh, nice.
And then you can see kind of the full schema here. You can also play with the playground here.
Specific for that branch?
Exactly. So it has its own infrastructure, its own GraphQL API, its own database that you can then play with. So So this is the endpoint for actually, so this is the endpoint for the add description branch. So let's go ahead and copy that. And in Vercel, and hopefully this is something we can improve with a real integration between Vercel and Grafbase, where you could link preview environments. That would be really magic.
I like that idea.
The Grafbase API URL for preview, but in this case, it's really for this one, right? So we're gonna give it this URL, but only for this preview environment. So it's a bit manual, but it works.
It's an underrated feature though, that you can add environment variables just to specific branches. Because if you imagine a world where a Grafbase and Vercel integration does exist, it's scoping those environment variables and that connection information specifically to that Git branch.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I love this feature. It's something I've been waiting for a while. So here we have an API key for the preview environment, which will work for all branches on Grafbase essentially, and that's the one we want to add here. All right, so this is for this. Actually, no, that was wrong. But I was going to set it to all preview branches, but whatever, it'll work for now.
Yeah,
we could do that essentially.
For sure. Fun to talk about though too.
Yeah. Okay. That was actually a bug. I think I had to refresh the page to show preview. Otherwise, it still showed that.
Well, I know what I'm doing for the rest of my day. I'm going to fix that.
All right. Cool. So now we got that going. In order to see it, we probably have to redeploy it. So let's do that.
For those tuning in, maybe wondering why the redeployment is necessary, it's because these environment variables are read during the build. They're not read dynamically on demand. So we're using those values to actually generate our built outputs that we're deploying out to Vercel.
Okay, so now when this is done, we're going to open it up and we should see, as expected, nothing in the database, but we should see the new description field. And then we can kind of play around with that. And when we're happy with it, we can merge the pull request, and then it will then automatically deploy to Grafbase and to Vercel.
And so this was in the background, Grafbase partitioned a new DynamoDB table specifically for this branch.
Yeah, exactly. So, and a new Graphql API that was deployed to a new subdomain, right? So this is a dedicated Cloudflare worker.
Got it. It could be helpful too. I'd love to hear your opinion on why, as you pull this up, on like why Cloudflare workers, why that versus maybe Lambda.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I started thinking about this idea 2-3 years ago, I mean, I read about the edge, I'd read about WebAssembly, but it was not kind of ready yet. But it's always kind of in the back of my head of like, what is the next thing after serverless? It's regionless, right? Like we want to be close. As the front-end community has shown, latency has an impact on a lot of businesses. On e-commerce, for example, you can clearly derive lower response times to higher conversion. But as the world is moving to kind of dynamic experiences where things cannot be cached, I think having a backend that can have low latencies globally by default is really, really kind of the next level. And we're here now. I think 2022 is the year of the edge, right? And Vercel and the whole industry is moving in that direction on the front end. So should the back end, right? That way, only then can you truly get good user experience end to end. So that's why we chose Cloudflare Workers to deploy all GraphQL APIs to by default.
Makes sense.
All right, so let's visit the preview branch. and like with the description or something. And here you can see now we have the description and the to-do, and hopefully, yes. Well, it looks like that didn't persist. That's interesting. Some kind of a bug somewhere. On the creation, it didn't persist the description, so I'll have to fix that somehow later.
Bug in the example, but not a bug in the product.
Yeah, exactly. So this works, right? Now we're happy. I mean, the next step is to merge it, right? So here you can see the Graph-based comment and the Vercel comment. So here's your branch, and here's your preview environment on Vercel. Go iterate on them, play with them, kind of troubleshoot, add things, remove things. And when you're happy, you merge it, which then goes off and deploys to production on Vercel, and the same on. So now it's deploying here, done, and it's building here.
Yep. So you merge your preview branch into your main Git branch that kicks off the production deploy on Vercel. That makes sense. Are there certain tools you think that pair better with GraphQL on the front end side that you feel like are easier to work with, or is it kind of, since GraphQL is a standard, it's like, well, bring whatever you want?
I mean, I think it's the latter. I think that's what I really like about this, that we don't have to teach you about a new query language or make you download an SDK in the language. We don't need to support all the languages in the world. So that's really the beauty of it. That you just like, it's just HTTP with the GraphQL spec on top of it, which is also good for, you know, if you are in a serverless environment or a native app, you probably want to speak HTTP. You don't want to provision a proxy on top of your existing database if your database is, you know, Postgres or MySQL or something that's TCP oriented. This is really like, it's modern, it's ready to consume in a serverless environment as well.
And then just to make sure I'm understanding, do you need do you provide caching, or do you need a caching layer with Graphabase?
Yeah, so I mean, since we are on the edge, we will provide an edge cache for you, and in fact, edge caching will be provided for you automatically, because since we know we are the database, essentially. We control all the mutations. We can do fancy invalidations and kind of real-time updates of the cache based on the GraphQL activity that goes on with your GraphQL. So yeah, I don't know when. I mean, there's a lot on our plates. We just launched a private beta in June. We started building in December, so it's definitely a large, ambitious roadmap. But edge caching is definitely something we want to bring to our users as soon as possible. Yeah,
that makes total sense. I'm impressed with how far y'all have came since launching. You made a lot of progress, so it's very exciting to see. Yeah.
I mean, it's also, honestly, it's also like timing. I think, you know, there's so many good tools available to startups these days. Like even a year ago or 2 years ago, it's like the ecosystem has evolved so much, and like the fact that all of our infrastructure is serverless means that we can, you know, offer it to our customers with much lower costs and time to market on our end, but also make it much cheaper to our customers. So that's something we're really excited about.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's check it out here in production, moment of truth. And here you go. So there it is on production, fully deployed and ready to go.
And then if you go back into your GraphQL Explorer and the Graphabase UI, you should be able to see the description poll if you add it to the query, right?
Yeah, so let's...
Because the schema change merged from preview into production, and
yeah,
you
it's
have
right
this
there.
new field available. Got it.
There you
Nice.
go. So,
And yeah, it's optional. So like the other one has null. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And then here you can kind of see we prefix the entity IDs with the name of the entity, lowercase with an underscore. So it's URL friendly, but it's also kind of something you use internally for GraphQL and caching and whatnot, for relay, that kind of stuff. So it's good to go.
That seems like a good architectural decision for the future as well too. Like when you do get into edge caching as well, and like automatic caching validation.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. That was awesome. That was a whirlwind demo, stepping all the way from 0 to production, preview, deployments, preview, APIs, persistence. There was a lot covered there. It was very, very cool. Thanks for taking us through that.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you never know with doing live demos, like, will this thing work? Will we have bugs? But it went pretty smooth.
Yeah, I have to say.
I'd love to hear a little bit more as we kind of wind things down about what you're working on next at Grafbase, and maybe when people can, or how they can request access to try things out today, and what you're the most excited about.
Absolutely. I mean, so starting off with the private beta, you can go to graphbase.com. There is a kind of early access form you can fill out, and then our backlog is pretty light, so we were basically inviting most people. You can also go to our Discord channel. So we have a community page on graphbase.com/community, which is a Discord link where you can ping me or anyone of our team who can help you get an invite. But the best way is just to sign up on the forum, and then you'll get an invite. In terms of the roadmap, so right now we're private beta. We want to be public beta later this year, if possible. Right now we're finishing kind of authorization that I alluded to with OpenID Connect, and also like permissions and all that stuff. That's key to building anything meaningful. We also want to add the ability to create custom GraphQL resolvers. And there it's going to be, you'll be able to write it in JavaScript, TypeScript, or a language that compiles to WebAssembly. So if you wanted to write a GraphQL resolver in Swift, you could, or even PHP. So nice. That's really, really exciting that it kind of brings, because the backend is so fragmented, right? There's no React or something like that for the backends. People like Rust or Swift or whatever it is they're using. We want to enable that, right? So that's coming. CLI deploys, of course. Also more Git providers: GitLab, Bitbucket, Magic Link, sign up. What else? Also like interfaces and unions. Also, that's something we don't support yet. A node query to be relay compliant. Also more sophisticated validation and filtering. So right now it's pretty much CRUDL operations, but we also want to support more sophisticated filtering. We recently launched a unique directive. Actually, today we launched it, so you can kind of tag at unique. Yeah, good timing. So that's kind of something. It's in the same spirit, like just productivity boosts. So like instead of you re-implementing or using a library, you just say at unique, and then that field is unique, and it kind of generates all the validation for you. And that's the kind of things we're going to do for default directives, and length and that kind of stuff.
Exciting. Well, I'm excited to see how progress keeps moving with that ambitious backlog, and appreciate you taking the time today to run us through a demo. If folks want to hear more, they should follow you on Twitter, go to graphbase.com and check things out, sign up for that private beta. And yeah, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it.